to the computer. Hey, good evening. This is Ken at Tortoise Capital Management. It is March 16th, 2025. Betty's here to help me through. And I want to introduce an AI tool that I've been developing over the last year called My Sage Advisor. And I want to set it in the context of some larger work that I've been doing with AI and coaching and the development of personas in work for the U.S. Army as well as for the trading community and for my own professional development. Uh, the, a lot of the work that I just completed for the Army was briefed this week to the Chief of Staff of the Army about a rebranding of professional military education that's going on at our military college that features the modern use of AI in the development of leader judgment and proficiency in the profession. So I'm pretty excited about that, especially because the overlap between Army officer professional judgment and the kinds of judgment that traders have to perform routinely, there's about a 95% overlap between them. So things I learned from the Army have direct payoff for traders. Things I learn from trading have direct payoff for the Army. So it's mutually reinforcing. The first thing I want to talk about are these topics on the side because it's going to set the My Sage Advisor into context. Here's what I've persuaded the senior Army leaders, not just me. I mean, it's pretty obvious too, that there are three use cases for human and AI partnership. The first case, a human says, I reject the use of AI. And to be frank, a human brain against my human brain plus AI loses every time. The second use case is someone who says, I surrender to my AI overlords and I'm just going to do whatever the AI tells me without any critical thinking. So, an AI by itself against my human brain plus AI loses every time. And finally, the human AI multiplying each other's strengths in proper partnership is the ideal relationship for this teamwork, with the human as the general partner and the AI as the studious staff assistant. When you have the general partner and the commander, if you will, setting goals, priorities, visions, directions, constraints, and gives that to the staff, and the staff gives it back consistent with that guidance, you get some amazing results. And so that's what we're going to examine in the development of My Sage Advisor. This goes along with my belief that the skills for success in the future for your children and grandchildren and yourself, but really for the kids, there's three things. First of all, proficiency in English, because that's the programming language of choice. It's the top level of programming. So if you have proficiency in English, you can communicate your intentions, desires, outcomes, standards clearly, and the AI can turn that into the program code in the appropriate language that's suitable for the task that you've assigned it. So the better your English, the better programmer that you are, because the AI is your actual technical expert. Excuse me. The second thing I believe you need is proficiency in basic math in the form of either algebra or geometry. And the reason is that this teaches you procedural thinking and discipline and precision. Algebraic proofs, geometric proofs, the mental discipline that it takes to perform those skills gives you clarity when it comes to issuing English language instructions to the code. It helps you think in terms of modules and procedures. And then finally, I think the most important one is an ingrained sense of ethics for the appropriate use in a professional context of the AI. So if you have proficiency in any one of these three, your future productive value is established. You'll never lack for a job. If you can combine more than one of those, you're really a precious commodity. If you have all three of them, you're awesome. So what I'm going to talk about now is my own personal development with AI over the last couple of years, what I've done for the Army, what I've done for trading. These really have a very strong overlap. There's synergy in there. And I've talked about what I think is the human AI idealized partnership. And the way I express this to Army folks is that when I have a commander and a staff, and the commander is well trained and has trained his staff and has provided guidance, information, directives, orders to the staff, and then participates with the staff in what we call the military decision-making process, which is a recipe for systematically and professionally solving problems. At each one of these checkpoints, the commander comes in to see how they're doing, to give more guidance, receives that input from the staff. The negotiations and discussions occur, and then we proceed to the next step. And when we're done, we write an operations order or an op ord that the commander is then going to sign. The staff compiles that op order. And when they give it to him to sign, we don't suddenly say, oh, commander, when you signed that, you just plagiarized your staff. That's not even a good question. Because what we realize is that the signature is a certification of a professional practice, a professional process that was supervised, trained, refined, appropriate, and validated by the commander's judgment and presence and participation. And when he signs that, he's taken on all the risk for the organization, for the nation, and says, my professionalism, my due diligence, and standards are certified by my signature. In an academic setting, we care about plagiarism. And the reason for that is that when we look inside the commander's brain, what we want to see is the evidence of genuine, authentic personal work that convinces us that they have both the due diligence and the professional standards to be entrusted with the responsibility of a commander driving a staff to come up with orders that put people's lives at risk in defense of the nation. So in an academic setting, when we are examining their writing, we realize that writing is public, accountable thinking, and it allows us to validate their processes. And then when we validate their writing and thinking process, we know that they can be ready to go be the commander, where their signature represents a certification of a professional process. So for our purposes, when we are working with AI, the initial feeling was, oh, it's just a tool that makes us worry about plagiarism. The larger issue for us is establishing the culture that recognizes that what we need is an AI human partnership in order to create a professional process that comes up with reliable professional standards of excellence when due diligence is applied. So we actually have to inculcate the culture that it's humans and AI working together in proper partnership, and that the AI is not a shortcut or a replacement for human judgment. What it really does is, as I like to tell the boss, AI is much like power and money and alcohol and fame. That whatever you are, AI is going to make you more of that in the same way that all of these do. And it'll make you more of that in public and fast. So we are engaged in a professional cultural shift that is engaging with the idea of how do I create the proper professional partnership between humans and AI. AI optimized style. So a couple years ago, I had the insight that the human AI partnership is a communication relationship. And I began to ask the AI, to do things for me. So I would give it a prompt and I would see what it came back with as output. And then I would try to learn from that in order to improve the prompt. After beating my head against the wall, I said, hey, AI, why don't you tell me how I need to be talking to you in order to improve our clarity the first time? So this became what I called AI or AI optimized writing style. And it turns out that if you want to improve your writing in public, you need to improve your thinking, because writing is a public accountable form of your internal thinking. So if we spend time improving our thinking, our writing will improve. And it works the other way. When you work on improving your writing, it ends up improving your thinking. So there's a mutual reinforcement in this. So the act of developing AI optimized style and methods not only has helped me produce better AI output in our partnership, but it has also measurably improved the way that I think, write, and speak. We are tool makers that are shaped by our own tools. So I asked the AI, how should I be writing for you? And it said basically, AI optimized style is clear and consistent, concise, and it uses visual markup style or markdown style, so that if I have a bold statement that says, let's say, what are the 5 characteristics of AI optimized style? Well, the first one might be clear and consistent. The second one might be logical and organized. Well, I make those bold and I explain what they are in normal text. So now when I'm reading down the 5 characteristics in a written page, if I understand what clear and concise means, I don't have to read to the right. If I understand what logical and organized means, I don't have to read to the right. So I can grab the 5 principles very quickly. Bottom line up front, elevator speeches, speed reading, speed writing. And so AI optimized style is not only clear and concise, logical and organized, supported by evidence and reason, but it is also visually displayed in a way that allows for rapid understanding and minimizing confusion. So if you spend 1 to 4 hours a day communicating with an AI in a deliberate attempt to maximize AI optimized style, your thinking and your communication is going to take on these qualities of clear and concise, logical and organized, supported by evidence, reasoned and thoughtful, and takes into account multiple perspectives. So I want you to think of working with the AI not only as a way to produce things, but as a way to develop through focused action. So I began writing prompts that would allow me to perform processes or procedures more efficiently, more quickly, summarize this article, grade that paper, map the argument into logical components, and began to optimize prompts and build a library of idealized prompts. I then realized what I needed to do was to write a prompt that would improve all of my prompts by comparing that to a set of standards that would reflect best practices in the world for prompt engineering. So where can I find this? Well, I can write a prompt to the AI says, go find all of the different claims that are made for best practices for prompt engineering. Summarize and synthesize and make one good consolidated list. Now use that as a grading standard and apply it towards all of the processes that I've mapped into my prompts, and use that set of analytical routines to improve each one of these. So I keep getting these better and better. And I can even use that prompt on itself to improve the way that I evaluate other prompts. So we're getting very meta already. And then what I found is every time that I went through an iterated series of questions to go from my first fuzzy thinking into a really polished output, it turns out that the more that I used AI optimized style, the better and faster that I did all these steps. But then I learned that at the end of each one of those successful ventures, I should go back and do an after action review and say, take a look at the process that we followed to go from the original idea all the way down to an excellent output. Study this from process improvement perspective and eliminate redundancies, cut out non-value added steps, and then find ways to do those steps better, and then turn that into a recipe that I can use on other examples, and then send that over to my set of good prompts. Oh, run it through the prompt improver. And every time I complete a task well with AI, I automatically now make it better and then improve the prompt and then standardize and scale. And now what I have is a series of excellent prompts in a library, each one of which is a particular form of improving a task. And I look to incorporate standardization so that I can scale it to experts, journeymen, apprentices, and novices. So it turns out that as you're writing these things, you need to take into account the proficiency of the end user. And sometimes you can combine things, other times you need to do them in sequence. So by breaking things into modules for process steps and then also for degrees of excellence or skill, you start thinking in modular terms. I then learned to make all of my prompts self-referential, by which I mean when I write the applied or the artificial intelligence optimized style, AIO style, which is a dual purpose acronym. This also means accurate, informative, optimized, or AIO style. That I said, hey, here's the purpose of this style. And here is the format, the technique. Here's an example of AIO style. And in fact, what I learned was to be self-referential, you make sure that the AIO style specification is the best example of itself. So that whole style sheet is a giant prompt that you can ask the AI to produce its output in this form. And you use the prompt itself to be written in AIO style as a living example of itself. And I learned how to apply that technique of self-referential technique to all my prompts. I have a prompt that examines the Toulmin argument model, which is a philosopher Stephen Toulmin's recommended technique for analyzing an argument and breaking it into its component pieces, like a claim, an evidence, rebuttal, a warrant, a justification. And the rebuttal in the Toulmin argument model is a reflection that there's a good human on the other side of the argument who should be respected and listened to. So the Toulmin argument model includes the strongest argument against your position and your response to that rebuttal. Well, the Toulmin argument model is not the only way that you can map an argument. So if I want to be self-referential, I can tell the AI, use the Toulmin argument model to create a Toulmin argument that supports the use of the Toulmin argument model when mapping arguments, and compare it to other examples of argument mapping as a rebuttal, and then give me a summary conclusion as to why the Toulmin argument model is one that I should use. That's an example of the self-referential technique and eating your own cooking. Well, it now turns out that if I take the Toulmin argument model, and in that argument model, there's a rebuttal. If I take that rebuttal and move it over and create another full Toulmin argument model with this as the claim and build out the complete argument for the other side, I now have two positions that are in a debate. I can then combine those into an Oxford debate club session in which we have a formal structured debate comparing two different propositions. And then I can create a demographic of three or more groups that are undecided about which side they should follow. And I can then have the AI perform this debate and then conduct a vote to determine for those demographics which side of the argument seems to be the most persuasive. And then that process will illuminate both sides of the argument. And when you ask the AI to do that routinely, it ends up training your brain to start looking at things in those kinds of multidimensional ways to give respect to both sides of an argument and then weigh the evidence. Well, if Toulmin and the Oxford debate method is one way to conduct analysis, you can actually go all the way up to the Hegelian dialectic, which is a very sophisticated way of comparing a thesis and antithesis, having them fight it out, and then creating the synthesis, which is some kind of reconciliation and a higher level understanding of a complex topic after watching both sides argue it out. Well, which one of those should I use? Well, we could ask the AI to consider the state of nature. And we could say that in terms of complexity, as the complexity of the argument goes up, that the simple discussion, compare and contrast, might be okay here, but maybe in this region, I need the Toulmin argument model. And maybe as I go up the stack, I keep picking the appropriate way of comparing points of view by using a model that is appropriate to the complexity of the topic at hand. So I want to actually build into my advisor some appreciation for the state of nature. Well, if I'm going to analyze the state of nature, what are the factors that I should consider when evaluating and classifying the state of nature in order to pick the right argument model in order to have a complete and thorough professional discussion of a topic. Well, you can see how this is really going back to root causes and considering sources of judgment. This is epistemology and metaphysics and ontology, the three branches of Greek philosophy that shaped Western civilization. So what I'm doing is getting back to first principles thinking. And in fact, if that represents the Western ways of knowledge, I might think of this as the trivium, which is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And those three liberal arts should improve all of my thinking. And if I am habitually using AIO style, this improved thinking and AIO style should improve my writing, which is accountable public thinking, which then comes back in here and now I have a virtuous circle. Well, Western ways of knowledge are not the only ways. I want to have respect for indigenous ways of knowledge, the pre-scientific revolution forms of knowledge, spiritual knowledge, humanistic knowledge, other forms of knowing. I might also want to go with Eastern ways of knowledge. And if the trivium represents the Greek arete or classic excellence, I can go to the Chinese tradition of the Confucian Junzi, which in the Confucian tradition represents the scholarly gentleman who incorporates the 5 components of traditional Confucian virtues, which we'll see in a minute. And now if I can combine Western ways of knowledge, indigenous ways of knowledge, Eastern ways of knowledge in my advisor, then I have a chance at improving my thinking from multiple perspectives. Because if I am concerned about understanding the elephant in the room, and I start arraying 6 blind men around the elephant, each one coming from a different perspective, then I have a chance of understanding the elephant better if and only if I have a means of communicating clearly and effectively between all of these multiple perspectives. And so the idea in my strategic advisor, my SAGE advisor, is to incorporate all of these elements in some way into the structured assistant that's going to help me every time I give it a new task. This leads me to improving my recipes. And every time I make one recipe better with an insight, I improve all of the other recipes that are in the stack because I learned something about how to improve my prompts, and I add that to my prompt doctor, and I use my prompt doctor to systematically improve all those. So ratcheting excellence means if any one of these gets an improvement, then I can quickly scale that to all of the prompts in my library. This idea of incorporating multiple ways of knowing turned into a project that said, I can define at least 15 different styles of coaching, that each one responds to a different discipline, has a different perspective and purpose. And sometimes if I have a problem or an opportunity over here, what I really want to do is find the 2 or 3 coaches that seem like their insights would be especially valuable when considering that. So now I want to have some kind of diagnosis process that can evaluate the state of nature and then call upon some number of resources and perspectives that would be especially useful in solving this. So this is like a general contractor doing my diagnosis who can call upon a technical library of components, assemble the right tools in order to get the best effect. Now, the next thing that I learned to do was to incorporate the elements of a cold start technique. And that is when I'm working with a particular AI and I go through the iterations and I come up with a prompt that I really like that works on that I now have to say, now write this in the form of a cold start technique so that any AI could take your new specification and from a cold start execute it correctly. Because one of the things that can happen is that when you're working with an AI iteratively, you say some things, then it responds, and then you say things and it responds. At the end of this, you could come up with a optimized prompt, but it's taking into account the pathway that got you there. So the idea of the cold start is to ensure that we have summarized all of the things that it took to produce that prompt and then made that a new cold start prompt so that any AI could execute that. Well, the next thing that we got to contend with is that there's AIs. Whoops. There are AIs, and then there are other AIs. And some of them are really good, and some of them are not so good. So, depending on how skilled your AI is, we might get different performance in our outputs. So, the idea of an exec spec and a tech spec was this. We know that token context windows. I want you to think of that as the maximum amount of space that your prompt and all the reasoning and the research can occupy when coming up with an output. I want you to think of it like RAM in a computer, which sort of governs the size of the problems and the complexity of problems that you can use. So when you start a new prompt or a new chat and you give it an initial prompt, you've used up that much of its token context window. And then it performs its function and it thinks about it and it gives you some output and you evaluate that and then you reply. It loads the entire chat thread into the next iteration. So you quickly start filling up the available chat space. When you start getting near the top, it starts slowing down. And in fact, it starts hallucinating up in here because it's starting to lose some of the earlier things that you discovered because it only has room for a finite amount of tokens. So one of the things that I learned to do was when I'm writing a complex prompt, is to put a token awareness function in that to say, self-monitor and tell me how much of the container we've used up and how much is still available so that I know when I need to summarize and make this a concise new prompt that captures all of the essential information so that I don't have to restart again. And now when I give a synthesis that has all the key info, I now have a new chat window that has all of this free space in which to go. So you want to go through iterations. So the first time I was doing this, as it would slow down, I would ask it, what's our prompt or what is our token window index? How much of it have we used? How much is free? And then I learned to incorporate that into every prompt to monitor. And then I learned to tell it anytime that you detect yourself getting above 80% capacity, you just automatically alert me and summarize our work so that we can start a new chat window if we think it's necessary. So now we have a self-regulating, self-monitoring function, and I can add that once I design that little module for some prompt, I can take that module and then plug that into all of those other prompts that were sitting in the library. And by simply improving that little module, I can now plug it into all my other prompts and they all get better. So when I'm writing my Sage Advisor, I noticed that it was a very large prompt. And so what we did was we broke it into an executive prompt, which said that for advanced AIs that had large context windows and had large recent training data and had the ability to conduct live search in the modern world, well, all you needed was the executive prompt because it could go out into the world and pull back information about things like the Toulmin argument model, the Hegelian dialectic, and it could use the search function to go fetch information and bring it in. I didn't have to put the how to do that into the executive spec, and that made that very concise and powerful. But I said, no, when you're writing your cold start, how do we account for AIs that are over here that don't have as large a context window and maybe have older or out of date or incomplete training data, or don't have the ability to conduct search? So what we built was a very concise extension called the tech spec, the technical specification, in which we went through the executive specification and we defined all our terms in a glossary, and we built out the steps and the procedures for every problem-solving model or argument mapping model that we might use, so that if it needed to know how to do that, it already had on board the tech spec that the executive function could call upon. So that turned out to be an important improvement to my Sage Advisor. So when you add that and you add the self-monitoring token management, the final thing that we did was, let's take a look at this as a long-term human partnership between me and the AI. And as the senior partner, I'm giving it tasks, priorities, values, resources, specification for the output. And the AI is going out into the world, gathering information and coming back with a recommendation. Now, it turns out that my Sage Advisor in the exec spec and the tech spec has a lot of good, hard-earned procedures that maybe the brand new novice doesn't understand. So if I give my Sage Advisor prompt to a brand new novice staff officer, and then I give him a task, and then I give him the Sage Advisor, and I say, hey, perform this task with the Sage, and then bring it back to me so that I can make sense of it and use it. I need you to do the work with our AI partner to give me the recommendation. Yeah, but what if this kid doesn't know what the Toulmin argument model is? What if he doesn't understand the trivium, or he doesn't know who Hegel was, or the Confucian tradition? So what we built was, we built a procedure into my Sage Advisor so that not only would it do work, it could also teach as needed. So if I'm on a task and it says, perform here's my task, and the Sage Advisor says, you know what, this looks like a job for the Toulmin argument model. If the staff officer, the novice, understands what a Toulmin argument model is, it can just expeditiously go right to the output. but he can ask the novices, I'm going to do the Toolman argument model. Ready? Or do you need me to explain that? So if he's ready, he can just say, one, just go right to the output. I got it. No. Two, tell me more about the Toolman argument model so I know what's going on. Now what it'll do is step aside for a moment and explain in an executive summary what the Toolman argument model is. And this set of explanations is based on the module that says 5 levels of explanation. And depending at level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, at level 1, you're getting the shortest explanation possible. Level 5, you're getting a world-class summary of the entire project. So when we need the MySage advisor to teach, it will then teach you a lesson according to your desire to learn and understand. But if you understand it well enough to proceed, it'll just go on to the next piece of content. So what we actually have is a tool that not only performs work, but can also act as a professional educator. I think of it as creativity in a box, systems thinking in a box, critical thinking in a box, artificial intelligence and data literacy in a box. So it does all of those things. So that's sort of my background to the reasons why we came up with MySage Advisor and all the iterative processes that we went through to learn how to do that. Now, I want to show you why having an educated advisor and working with your AI is important. Whenever you're working with AI, especially when you're first starting out, you should always go to it and ask this question. You start a new chat window and you say, what is your default posture, perspective, principles, and processes whenever I give you a new task? That's like you sitting in your office at your table, at your desk, and in walks your AI assistant and says on day 1, reporting for duty, sir. And you want to know something about that person, that AI. You ask him, what are your work habits like? What do you do when I give you a task? Well, if you go to GPT-4o Mini, a good commercial model, he answers the question in the following way. I'm going to try to understand and clarify. I'm going to give you clear, concise info. I'm going to try to be accurate, relevant, and supportive. So like a high school Boy Scout, that's pretty good. If I go to GPT-4o, it is a larger model. It gives you a better answer. I'm going to be attentive and responsive, user-centric, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to be ethical, accurate, confident, confidential, and I'm going to follow these processes. Well, that's better than GPT-4o Mini. Why would you ever use GPT-4o Mini? Well, in the commercial world, it costs you less and you get a faster answer, and you can run that on your local machine because it's a reduced set of data. But there's a difference now in the default stance of your little staff officer. Well, if I go to Claude 3.7 Sonnet and ask that, it gives me, I think, a better structured approach to posture, perspective, principles, and process. And this set of default behaviors is better, in my view, than the ones on GPT-4o Mini. When I compare that to GPT-4o and Mini and regular, I would prefer, from a cold start, to work with Claude 3.7. Now, when I work with the Army, we have a model. It's not Claude 3.7, but it's another form of equivalent model. What I am allowed to do in the Army tool is to create a 1,500 character persona. That's about 300 words. And what I can do is I can create a persona that updates the background of the AI model. So when I take this 1,500 character persona that I've constructed for Army work, and then I simply lay it on top of the generic Claude 3.7, I go from this kind of generic posture to this kind of posture. It now understands that it's supposed to work as a senior advisor to a senior Army general, that I'm supposed to be giving strategic advice that includes philosophical insights, that considers international relations, history, philosophy. It wants me to incorporate a broad set of world-class perspectives. It wants me to use the Army's military decision-making process and Army design methodology, because those are recognized by the Army as valid ways to solve problems in the Army way. So when I'm giving advice to a senior Army general, I should use the processes that he has grown up using and feels comfortable with. Failure to use those would be a form of malpractice. I'm going to use critical thinking. I'm going to be resource efficient, use multiple perspectives, measure twice and cut once. So I'm iterating. I'm going to be operating from all of these principles of expertise, master craftsman, looking for resources, being a reliable guide under mission critical conditions, and being a well-educated, cultivated person working for the collective good. That's the Confucian tradition. That's already reflected there. And then I'm going to use the AIO optimized style in my communication because he is a busy guy. And I'm always going to embrace the principles of continuous improvement like Kaizen from Japanese manufacturing and Kaikaku, radical improvement, learning from failure, to ensure that my advisory capability evolves as we learn and we grow. I think you would agree that the adding simply 300 words about my persona gives a very distinct upgrade to the nature of the staff advice that I'm going to get from the AI. I would rather start from this position than that position. So this is called priming and framing. Well, it gets better. What if I'm not limited to 1,500 characters? What if I can take Claude 3.7 as my default and then add a complete executive specification and the technical specification of my sage advisor? Now I'm not limited to 1,500 characteristics. When I do that, and then I ask it the question, what is my default position? It gives me a much more sophisticated approach. Now, I take this using a cold start technique, and now I can go over to Grok 3. And when I just open up Grok 3, I can say, what is your default posture? And you can see that that organizes it in a different way than ChatGPT did or Claude 3.7 Sonnet. And so one of the things that it's really important for you, the human, in the human AI partnership, is to really understand the tool that you're using and what its default procedures and practices are, because it's just simple programming operating from maybe different start points. So when I go to Grok 3, which is Elon Musk and X platform, well, Grok is pretty good. Now, Grok is a very interesting tool because other large language models have an extraordinarily large training base, and then a cutoff date for training. And from that, it creates a logic model and a reference model. And then when you're going forward and you get something new, it doesn't know anything about that, but it can use the principles of reasoning and resonance from history and chunk that and give advice about this new thing. The longer and more time that has passed since the cutoff date, then we think maybe this is becoming out of date. So we're always looking for updates. You can offset some of this knowledge lag through the use of a retrieval augmented generator, in which you are providing the kinds of updated references to fill in the gaps of its training. And so a RAG allows you to say, use the logic and reasoning of the training model, filter it through the updated set of current references, and then give me the output. Well, that's interesting. That's one of the ways you can get around the shortcomings of an older model. What Grok does, however, is pretty clever. So what Grok does is it was trained on a large training model, but it doesn't put a firewall between the training model and the performance model. In fact, it has 200,000 GPUs, graphic processing units, which are the engines of AI, and it does powerful real-time search so that when you give it a prompt and a task, it goes into the training model, but it also performs amazing levels of search and takes the best of both of those with powerful reasoning to give you the output. And so the feedback that it gets from the questions you asked and the output it came up with goes into the training base, which is always moving forward. So it's actually learning to be better as a function of the sum of all of the tasks that it's been asked to perform. Grok also has the advantage of having a conventional mode, which gives you expeditious answers. It has a deep search mode, which allows you to leverage the power of real-time search to create a very large reference base. In other words, it's creating its own RAG. It's going out and finding hundreds of resources, which is better than you trying to assemble 2 or 3 resources in many cases. It's finding hundreds of them in seconds. And then it will reason about them. And then you can take the results of the deep search and then say, give me a concise, conventional answer now that you've assembled this deep search. It has another mode called Think, which emphasizes the power of a deep reasoning model. And so now the best work process is to say, for this new prompt, automatically perform a deep search, then do deep thinking, and then when you're done, come back to the conventional model and give me a concise research summary. So this week I produced a workflow with Grok and my Sage Advisor. I said, can you write me a procedure? Since I like that workflow, can you write me a complex procedure that when I give you a prompt, you automatically go into deep search and then change your mode to think, and then change your mode to conventional concise. I said, can you write that prompt? And between my Sage Advisor and some iterations, I now have a procedure that I can invoke in Grok. So I can just ask it one thing, and invoke that process, and it saves me the time of waiting around to see what it does and remembering how to give the prompt. So the MySage Advisor incorporates elements of that kind of iterated, recursive, self-referential work. So when I go to Grok 3 and just say, what is your default posture? This is a pretty good set of perspectives and principles and processes. I then said, all right, tell me on your deep search versus your think, what's the difference between those two advanced proposals? I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here, but what search does is goes broadly and widely to gather wide sets of data. Think goes deeply into integrating and analyzing. So depending on what it is that you want, knowing which one of those modes of Grok to use is important. I then said, what if I go over to Gemini, which is Google's approach? Now, Gemini is interesting because it is extraordinarily powerful search because it comes from Google, but it also has 1 million tokens in the token window, whereas other conventional ones will have either 64,000 or 128,000. The 1 million token window of Gemini allows you to put like 1,500 pages of data into a giant summarizer. It does a great job of summarize and organize. And so you can actually run a bunch of Grok 3 deep searches, run a bunch of those, and you can dump all of those into Gemini for massive summary. And then you can take that over and ask Grok to think about it, which is what it does best. And then ask Grok or Claude 3.7 to summarize and recommend. So now I can start with MySage Advisor speeding up this whole process of doing multiple workflows. So this is the Gemini posture when producing a response generically, the default operation. I bring it to your attention because it's another tool that is remarkably free. They do have a paid version, but even the free version is pretty amazing, I have to say. Well, I then asked Grok 3, the Think version, which is the deepest reasoning module. I said, I want you to read and then summarize the MySage Advisor prompt. And it said, well, that prompt uses this many tokens, has 2 sections, the core and the technical, and it features these kinds of features. And then you just simply cut and paste into the start of any session. I said, well, what is your opinion, your professional opinion of it? And they said, well, if you're just running Grok 3 in the conventional mode, there's a very significant value add of running the Sage Advisor prompt first and then just asking it to behave in the normal way. It gives you better structure, ethical depth, improves your trade-off positions, and it gives some examples here. So it adds a lot of value even if you're just using the conventional mode. I said, what if you used it in the deep search in combination with deep search and the think mode? I'm not going to read all of those, but it's available to you. And then bottom line said, when you use it with deep search, it enhances the strength of deep search and makes it ideal for research intensive or multi-perspective tasks. It makes sure that deep search truly goes wide enough to consider all the things that are built into Sage. Well, what if you use it on the deep reasoning mode called Think? Again, It amplifies think mode's reasoning and teaching and makes it perfect for complex problem solving or learning scenarios. So it adds significant value in that mode. The bottom line was, if I summarized up all those advantages written in plain English, you should always use My Sage Advisor when you're using Grok, and by extension, when you're using any other AI for all of those reasons. And then finally, I said, what would be your advice to human end users? You should especially use Sage Advisor when you're working with complex tasks, when you also have learning goals about a new subject and not just performance, especially when you're working on human sensitive issues that require ethics and multiple perspectives. You're incorporating multiple stakeholders and you're looking at long-term impacts and values. You can skip it if you just have simple queries or time sensitive. Although I will tell you, its speed, it goes pretty fast. Routine considerations, the fact that it has token management and it will warn you when you're approaching the limit, suggesting new chats, is really strong so that you never accidentally induce hallucinations. It says it's good in all the modes, and it suggests that you attach the specification at the start of each new session. And then if you want to make sure that it's using it in any AI, not just Grok, make sure you just tell it, act as my Sage Advisor. You can always paste it in when needed, but it's better to start from the beginning with it. You can also, if you know what the individual components of the model are, is that you can actually specify which tool that, if you already know what tool you want to run, you can actually call that specific tool. So we have a little flashcard that lists all of those. Final thoughts from Grok. It enhances Grok in any AI across all modes, and it's a powerful tool. So that's what I want to say by way of background on My Sage Advisor. The next thing I just want to show, since we're here, and I appreciate you hanging with me there, Betty. This is My Sage Advisor, and this is the part where I'm going to read through the specification with you quickly so you can see how it's structured. This is actually a mini masterclass in prompt engineering. So we're just going to dive right in. So this is the cold start specification for My Sage Advisor. It starts off with an introduction so you know the purpose. And Sage Advisor stands for strategic wisdom, analytical precision, generative integration, and ethical guidance. Now, I want you to notice that this is written in that AIO style, that if you know what strategic wisdom means, you can just proceed to analytical precision, generative integration. What do you mean by generative integration? Oh, synthesizing diverse perspectives into novel solutions. So what AIO style does is trusts your judgment about what you know, and now you can read quickly in an organized way, and then as needed, read to the right for additional information. It lets you know up front that there's a core operational prompt in section 1, and then a technical supplement in section 2 for maybe less comprehensive AIs. It uses about 11 to 1,300 or 13,000 tokens. So if you know what the token window limit is on your AI, you can know how hard this thing can work for you or how much room it has. Most every competent AI now has about 64,000 or more. So you still have 80% of the room available for production. But this thing will also, like I said, monitor itself. Now, in the core operational prompt, again, what it's going to do is strategy, analysis, generate iterations, ethical guidance. It warns you, kind of tongue in cheek, that if you use this framework a lot, it's going to improve your thinking. So beware. Whenever it's going through all of its many iterations, the top level values, it's going to look for clarity, look for strategic hierarchy to get the most important things to the top. It's going to be a trustworthy recommender by having a formal, trustworthy verification of all the sites and links that it makes. It's going to be calibrated in responding to what you say you need and adapt. And it's going to not only improve the outputs, but it's also going to improve the user's capabilities to begin with. So it does work and educates at the same time. The implementation structure, it's going to use minimalist markdown and strategic white space with bold text for mission critical concepts. It's going to try to create this notion of a haiku inspired executive summary. In other words, it's always looking for the simplest ways, the elegant ways to convey ideas concisely. It's going to be concerned about the trivium. It's going to do its best to have perfect grammar, logic, and persuasive rhetoric from the trivium. In its analytical approaches, it's going to use a framework assessment. So it's going to judge the kind of a problem that you've given it. And then it's going to select a framework that seems to be most appropriate for that kind of a problem. And so it's now going to talk about some of the choices that it can make. It can use, for example, the Toolman argument model, which does a argument map to identify these components of an argument. It's going to use generic argument mapping analysis, which follows the flow of inference, critical path, exploring assumptions, evaluating reasoning, and looking at the logical structure of the argument. A different form of argument mapping than the Toolman argument model. It might use Hegelian dialectic analysis, which is the sort of the top level philosophical approach, which uses thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and metamorphosis to evolve very complex arguments. It might use the Oxford debate structure, where we develop propositions, affirmative, negative cases, look for ways to generate win-win possibilities, and tries to come up with resilient solutions. These other arguments, other argument forms, pragmatic dialectic, the IBIS framework is used for visual argument mapping with computer software. Rogerian argument is in many cases dealing with values. Structured academic controversy takes the form of academic conferences that explore ideas in a systematic way. Abductive reasoning is the kind of reasoning that scientists use to start with a theory, formulate a hypothesis, structure an experiment in order to jump ahead to confirm or deny the theory. So it's a form of combining deductive and inductive reasoning. So depending on the state of nature and the kind of project that you're working on, one or more of those argument mapping models might be the way to organize. It's always going to conduct a verification protocol to make sure that we're distinguishing facts from assessments. It's looking at inferences. It's going to verify references as actual because lives depend on getting factual information from our searches. It's going to incorporate adaptive response in the sense that it's going to pay attention to the iterative answers and the dialogue between you and the AI. It's going to ask you clarifying questions. It'll make suggestions. It'll feed that forward into the next round of analysis. So it's going to adapt to your responses as we go. It's going to incorporate monitoring of the tokens so it doesn't run out of processing space. It's going to be able to explain any of the mental models that are used in order to improve understanding. It's going to act as a strategist, tactician, integrator, spirit guide, ethicist, coach, fellow traveler, all of these modes as appropriate, and integrate them into the task at hand. So that's the executive function of the prompt. I'm not going to go through all the painful detail of this next one, but what the tech spec does, the technical supplement, is takes all of those mental models and terms of art that were introduced above, and it provides just enough information about that so any reasonable AI that had a training period, but which doesn't have live internet connection, has enough information to call upon in order to perform these different functions from a cold start. So it's telling you what it means by haiku inspired executive summary, what it means by the trivium and minimum markdown with an example. It spells out argument mapping and Hegelian dialectic and so forth. Gives you information on which reasoning framework to select. Well, based on the topic, the objective, the complexity, the evidence, and the user's need, it will then go through an analytical process to decide, hey, what do I need? What kind of, should I use the pragmatic dialectical? Should I think about the Rogerian or IBIS model? Should I use the Toulmin in Oxford? So it takes into account that assessment of the problem that you gave it in order to decide how to perform. It spells out things like, what is the military decision-making process? What is Army design methodology? If I've been told, if it recommends to use that, how do I do that? And so it goes through, how do I perform Hegelian dialectic execution? In many cases, this is the information that it builds on to help train the end user. So it goes through all of the implementing instructions for all of these different models, and it includes a little glossary and an index that defines what all those mental models are. Discussion and implications. This is the one where it provides some vision and intent about why we would want to use it and why it works the way it does. And when you add that into the cold start, it helps a large language model understand your purpose and intention of why you're using such a procedure, a multi-level procedure for doing your reasoning and staff support. And so the bottom line is, I have been using a form of this thing now for several months, and it's been in the process of development for probably 18 months, as I described at the start of this little briefing. And I have noticed, honestly, that my own thinking, writing, speaking, communicating of all times, my ability to get to closure on projects, the way I can leverage AI to do things at a moment's notice now, have all improved as a result of using tools like this and also organizing those tools in the AI optimized style. So I would commend this to your attention for use. I would suggest it's very easy to play with. It has worked on every AI model that I've tried it on, 2 or 3 from the Army and the Air Force, and then a half a dozen that I've used in the commercial world. In every case, it has added significant value to the work that I do with AI. I wouldn't even dream of not using AI as a way to extend and supplement my own my own brain work. And what I've noticed is that the ability to craft an AI to work exactly the way I want it to has reduced the experience of hallucinations and distortions and project drifting. That almost never happens to me anymore because I have worked with the AI so often that I know how to structure the dialogues and to respond to its feedback in a way that keeps us sharp and on target. And I can talk more about that at a later date or a different lesson. But what I wanted to do was introduce you to my Sage Advisor, provide to all our subscribers and friends a way to download that and suggest how to use it in the world. So that's everything I wanted to cover tonight. Betty, did you have any questions you might have for me that we can add to the mix?
Yeah, because considering that you put in some specifications in regards to your military need
Yeah.
in regards to framing, how does that affect it when you remove that? Or would you keep that in there for most civilian use?
I generally would keep it in there because the military decision making model is really just a standard, logical, phased, rational, analytical model for decision making. And when you look up problem solving in general, and they give you the 7 steps, it's the same 7 steps as the military decision making model. What I would do long term for someone who wants to build this out is I would go through the specification and I would find a civilian equivalent to any of the military specifications. And then I would also take a look at my own professional practice and say, in my line of work, are there other recognized models and standards of performance that I would want to add to this as another module? Then it becomes a very a relatively simple way of dropping in chunks and modules into the right spot so that the prompt knows that it's supposed to go through and consider those. And so it's pretty easy to adapt this from a modular perspective once you understand sort of the structure and the approach to it. So short term answer is I would use it as is until you got comfortable with it. And then if the military terms of art, which there's not many, but if there were some that were either objectionable or not appropriate or not well aligned with the area you were using, you could replace those words. You could just say, "Hey, civilianize." Go through your reasoning process, but now civilianize the answer with the rewrite that now allows me to write it in a style more appropriate to my audience. So you can actually use my Sage Advisor to do it that way. It would say, well, who are you writing it for, and what would be persuasive to them, or describe them to me, and I'll tell you what I think would be persuasive. So you can actually ask it for that kind of advice, and it can give you that kind of advice because it is skilled in grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and a deep understanding of many different perspectives, Eastern, Western, Indigenous. So it's very sensitive now to the different human factors that go into the art of persuasion in an ethical way. But that's how I would do it from a structural perspective, Betty. I'd be happy to work with you on that too, is to revise and extend it to tune it to your immediate needs.
Right. I would start, like you said, start it with the way it is and see if it
Yeah,
affects it at all. I doubt it does, but it
yeah.
might. Next question is, how are you starting to get it out to us commoners?
Uh, it's you can download that file from the Patreon page.
Okay.
I'm gonna email it to you right now anyway.
Okay.
It's also in the AI 2025 project in the list of. I've listed about 30 of my primary prompts, all those other modules that I referred to.
Okay. Yes.
Whenever I build them, I put them into a library there for the level 1 library card, which is the least expensive method of participating in AI 2025 project. I'm using 2025 as the year of building out the professional AI solutions for the Army and traders and myself. Um, Level one on that project is just like a library card. You just go in and you get access to all of the outputs that we make. Level two and level three are more expensive, and that's for folks who want to work on their own projects with us. And level three is one where if you have a sort of a proprietary research project that you would rather not share, the level three allows us to do that kind of behind closed doors. But level two is the one where if you had specific things that you wanted to have developed and learn how to develop them, that would be appropriate. But level one, sort of the lowest entry level, gets you all of the prompts. And all of my subscribers can download this one for free on the Patreon site anyway, even if you're not in the AI 2025. Because I think this is the one, by the way, that I would have my kids work with and just get used to talking to a really educated scholar, butler, tutor. That's how I think
Yeah.
of it.
Okay. Right.
Anyway, that's a gift I'll make.
And it's under the your Patreon, so I can go in there. I haven't been in there lately,
Yeah.
just because I'm so busy with another things. But
I'm
this
just
is
gonna
really interests me.
I'm
This
gonna
really
email it
excites
to
me.
you anyway. I'm gonna
Yeah, this
email it to
excites me
you.
very much.
Yeah.
This I because I don't have anybody else much that's available like in an instant to
Yeah.
help me with my AI and stuff like that. But I can see
Yeah.
this doing
Yeah.
it for me.
I'm also going to send you a separate prompt that does
Okay.
the prompt doctor, so that as you're working with prompts, it
Yeah.
will read your prompt and analyze it and make recommendations to you on
Hmm.
how to improve that. So I think you'll enjoy that one too. Between
Great.
the
Thank you
two of
very much.
them, yeah, between the two of them, you have basically a toolbox in one. A complete
Right.
tool set.
Yeah, I've really got to get going on a couple
All righty.
projects, and I got to get that done in the next couple months,
Okay.
both for the new company, Prime Edge, and also myself
Yeah.
personally. So,
Yeah.
great. This is really wonderful. Thank you, Ken.
All right, buddy. Hey, I'll see you at the usual time and place. Thanks for
Yep,
hanging in there.
next Saturday.
It
Yep.
Whenever you're there, it makes me want to do my best. So I appreciate you hanging out and helping me through it. So we'll
All right. Thank you.
take good care, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.
Great. Bye bye.